Okay, and we are live, Steve Wedel. So, thank you so much for joining me here, Steve. So this is welcome to the very first ever official episode of Dark Bites Presents Horror in Review. So today, of course, we have yourself, Steve Wedel, who is a father, a teacher, and not just a proverbial type. You actually do teach for a living in the daytime job, and of course, by night you write incredible books across all kinds of genres. I think you've got about 35 books. I think your bio said.
Yeah, it's about 35. Yeah, counting the
Wow, that's
pseudonym.
right. Yeah, no, that's so impressive. And I know it's kind of interesting because I know the books you first wrote don't exactly line up with the first books you actually published. So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I know I got introduced to you through your Werewolf Saga, which I was lucky enough to cover for our buddy Greg Lamberson when he gave him a little plug here. So he ran fearzone.com, which sadly is no more. But while it was going, it had some great content. And I remember Greg sent me a bunch of your books over. And I first fell in love with your writing through the Werewolf Saga, which was pretty awesome. Definitely different than anything else I'd ever written or I'd ever read before, rather. Of course, it's kind of, if you want to equate, sort of even with zombies, you've got your fast zombies, which a lot of people think fast zombies suck, to the slow, lumbering, more George Romero zombies. You kind of did the same thing with the Werewolf Saga. And I remember I really loved that because it really got me in touch with what I found would be kind of your stable as far as the way that you approached all of your stories, where, sure, you've got these savage beasts as far as what you did with the Werewolf Saga, but they really revolved around, the relationships that you had built with these, amazing creatures. And yes, there's obviously that carnal, feral aspect of the werewolves that would translate into a lot of your other characters that found themselves in very unfortunate, horrific experiences. But at the root of it all, you're really tied in with, the human nature of these beasts and how they kind of work together and, through thick or through thin. Was that when you were, if you don't mind me talking about that for a moment before I get to what I think was your first of the actual books that you wrote that you would later publish. Did you notice when you were writing the Werewolf Saga? I mean, did you realize that you were essentially reinventing the werewolf wheel, and that what you had written as far as that canon goes, the subgenre werewolves, that it would be taken as a reinvention of that particular wheel?
Not really. When I was writing it, I was thinking that I kind of wanted to do with werewolves what Anne Rice had done with vampires. And I mean, what me about Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles was the relationships. Oh, yeah, they were vicious and they sucked blood and killed people, but you came to care for them, and that's what I wanted with the werewolves. And I don't know, I miss Shara. Writing 3 books, like over 300,000 words with her and all of her friends, and now it's been almost 10 years, almost 15 years maybe since Nadia's out. And I keep thinking, I'm going to go back to it. There's still stories to tell, but then I also think of, what Anne Rice did with the Vampire Chronicles, and it's like, it really sucks now. And if she just left it alone, I'd still think a lot more of it. So I don't know. I may go back someday. We'll see.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, I'd love for you to go back to that again, but I know you obviously have a lot of other stories to tell. And I love how it just so happened to have here, how it all started with Hunted by Human Wolves, which was actually, I mean, you read that and, it says on here, I think it says on there somewhere, maybe not in this particular issue or edition of it, but that it was actually inspired by true events. And of course, you read that and you're thinking, yeah, right, this is some kind of did you just Blair Witch this thing, but it really did transpire from actual true events where you interviewed somebody in the back of the book about, the real life Catherine Cross, where she ultimately became, I guess, the catalyst to launch the entire series for you.
Well, actually, sorry, my cat's in my closet. Actually, I'd written Shepard first, and to come now defunct 3F Publications, and I was working at a newspaper called the Journal Record. It's a business newspaper in downtown Oklahoma City. And the photographer, I was telling the photographer about my book, and he asked if I'd ever heard of Catherine Cross, and I told him no. So he told me just a little bit. So I got in touch with what at the time was called the Oklahoma City Ghost Club and asked if they had anybody there who knew anything about it. And that led me to Mary Franklin, the woman I interviewed in the book. Yeah. And everything about Catherine Cross, according to Mary Franklin anyway, just seemed to fit with the mythology I'd created for the werewolf. So I did that book, and originally it was supposed to be a free giveaway for everybody who bought Shara through Shock Lines, the old bookstore online. And Shara launched at Horror Find 2003. And unfortunately, my publisher spent most of her time not selling books. And went under soon after that. And then Scribe Press picked up Murdered by Human Wolves, and then later, Shara and Ulrich, but that didn't work out very well because, small presses, they struggle, I know, but there was no money flowing toward the author in that case. So I had to end that relationship. But yeah, I don't know. I love those books. I love for a while there, people always referred to me as the werewolf guy.
Yeah.
So it was a good time. But yeah, it was Shara and then Murdered by Human Wolves. And then I ended up making Murdered by Human Wolves, kind of the unofficial prequel. Prairie has been in them. Thomas McGrath, who shows up in Ulrich, is kind of the hero, I guess. Or maybe a villain. I don't know. Depends on your perspective, maybe.
A little bit of both, I think. A little bit of both. He's kind of the anti-hero kind of guy where he never asked to be a hero, but he never asked to be a bad guy either. It seems like he kind of floats in between, like almost like a bit of a rogue, and he just follows his heart wherever it leads. Yeah,
that's pretty much exactly it.
So, I loved his stuff. And the cool thing too that I love you've, like, I think a lot of other folks out there regarding the small press. There are some fantastic ones out there. I name a few of them, but I know I'd forget some of them, and I'd feel bad about that because there's some that do deserve to be plugged in. But it's definitely a massive struggle, with the industry itself, and I think a lot more folks are sort of taking to their own imprints as well and doing things their own way, and a lot more authors that are both very well established and ones that are just starting out are not just authors, but have become real entrepreneurs as well. And I love how you've started your Moonhowler Press. Well, you've had that imprint for a while. Regarding revisiting the Werewolf Saga, or even to reinvigorate it, if you will, have you considered, rebranding them with the Moonhowler Press and maybe even come up with new titles and kind of reintroduce them into the world and with some of even the werewolves in your backlog of other books?
Well, all the rights to the Werewolf Saga came back to me, and they are out in Moonhowler Press editions. They all have new covers. The last book, Nadia's Children, has only appeared from Moonhowler Press. And it's been a while, and maybe I ought to reintroduce them with covers. But the covers that are on them right now, at least, Shara, Ulrich, and Nadia's Children, were designed by my oldest son. So it's like, I need to change the covers on them. But I don't know. But yeah. I'd like to submit to other small presses, but it seems like every time a press accepts my book, it goes under. So I think I'm doing the genre a favor by just doing it myself.
Absolutely. Well, it's like you're doing the competition a favor too, because clearly, such is the power of Steve Wedel, the destroyer of small press publications.
Yeah,
the curse and the blessing I got.
Yeah. Well, I could tell
I know
you
what you mean. It's funny because I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I could tell you some stories about small presses. There was one. I mean, I wanted to work with them so bad, and they accepted my book. And like a week later, they announced that they were completely changing the way they were doing things, and it was not very author friendly. It's like, oh man, I had a 3-book deal with them, and I pulled out. So yeah, it's a mess. Doing it myself though, I mean, I can see every sale. I know how much money's coming my way.
Yeah.
Through KDP, I mean, I can go in and look and see where in the world my books are selling, which is kind of nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's and obviously it's just a lot of time management, I suppose, too, because unfortunately, I think gone are the days for most of us where you get to be that romanticized starving artist because putting your blood, sweat, and tears into something, and that's all that you're doing, and you're eating out of cold cans of beans. It's not as romantic as it sounds, and unfortunately, living poor in a gutter and having your work live on and being more famous and successful than you ever were, there's no romance in that. So of course you've got a day job to hold out as well to support the writing and the eating and the paying of the bills and the things that most general people have to do, of course. So it's a lot of time management, I'm sure, on your part.
It is. The marketing is the hardest part. I mean, this is National Novel Writing Month, and I hit my goal of 50,000 words in 17 days. So I've got all these books out, but the sales could be a lot better. But that's something that I'm just not very good at. Pushing myself. I have a friend in my hometown of Enid, and we go to a lot of conventions together. And there I am with like 30 titles on my table, and he's got only 4 that he's done so far. And he'll outsell me 10-1 at every convention, and it's his marketing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. So yeah, and it's definitely interesting because I know I've been writing reviews and doing interviews as you know for must have been, it's got to be around 20 years or so. But certainly, putting it together in a collection that I did later last year.
Yeah.
Kind of seeing the other side of things, you think, okay, I must be an expert on that stuff because I talk to so many people that are experts on that stuff. And until you're actually doing it, you realize I don't know a damn thing about actually publishing and the marketing aspects of it and everything that goes into it. And I definitely have so much respect for people that just sort of catch that shooting star and, find a way to do it and to be, those marketing geniuses. And this is somebody I've always worked in some sort of a sales environment. So I like to think I know a thing or two about marketing and selling, but when it comes to doing that with books and tying it all together in the perfect storm, it's a different animal.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I thought I could do better because I used to do public relations and deal with the media all the time. But it's hard. And then you got to make the choice: am I going to spend all this time marketing, or am I going to write something new? And for me, I always go back to the writing because that's the part of it I love. And I used to
thank God.
there are books that tell you just keep publishing. The more titles you put out there, the more you're going to be able to catch people's attention on Amazon. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, it's and I wouldn't mind talking to you about that a little bit as well. More on the positive aspect of what you're doing, and thank God. And I thank you for doing that, for not being sort of stuck in the marketing rut and just marching on and writing more books. As you know, I've been beating your drum for. Maybe that doesn't sound right, but I've been banging the drum for. That doesn't sound much better, but you know what I mean. I've been advocating you. There we go. I've been advocating you for a long time as well. So, if there's any publishers that are out there, or even readers for that matter, that have never heard of you, buy Steve Wedel's books. Seriously, I've considered you a friend. You've become a friend over the years. But really, I mean, just the writing that you've got is absolutely incredible. And I mean, there's a few people I could think of that really should be on bestsellers lists that I think would be on bestsellers lists if only the right people would just simply pick up their books and give you a chance. You're definitely one of them. And I know for a long time you haven't been writing. You went through a period of time where you've been writing alongside with Carrie Jones, who is a New York Times bestseller. So that definitely goes to show the quality of your writing. I mean, I know you've known Carrie for a long time, but she hardly needed. Hopefully, don't take this the wrong way, but she hardly needed you to boost her sales and her clout. She chose to write with you because obviously she saw a lot of talent there and felt that it would mesh really well with the more para-romance stuff that she did. And I guess to get to my point, I know that you obviously went through quite a bit in your own personal life. I'll leave it up to you what you want to divulge in regards to that. But I know for a while, you just weren't writing at all because you were, kind of getting back in the saddle, figuring out your own stuff in your own day-to-day life as well. And I was so happy to find that you came up with a new book and you got back to your roots with the book called Mother. And I wish I could show that here, but I don't have the paperback copy right now, which is of course available. It's a beautiful novella, I guess, if you will, or a short novel that came about through a Nanowrimo event that you wrote, I think, a number of years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, it was last year.
Oh, last year. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
The concept for the book, I've had that pretty much since I started writing over 30 years ago. And I just
kept
because, it was like, oh, I'm not ready for this book yet. And then last year I decided I was going to do the National Novel Writing Month. And okay, well, which idea am I going to do? It's like, I think I'm ready for this. And of course, it came out completely different than the original concept. But I was pretty happy with it. One thing, I've been playing with structure a lot over the last several books. Excuse me. So like with the end of Mother, as we changed narrators, knowing that, they were isolated and the people who began to write it had never been out of the cave, I had to change the writing style. And I wondered how that would go over with the readers to have words deliberately misspelled, poor grammar. So, the book hasn't been out long, so I haven't got a lot of feedback on it. So I'm interested to see what people will think of that.
Me too. And again, thanks so much for the opportunity to be one of the first people to read it and to cover it. To give a bit of a plug in that regard, so I'm pretty happy. So that's going to be, I did review that for Rumor magazine, so that's going to be coming out in their January issue, December-January issue. Do I have that right? Yes, yep, I do. December-January issue. And usually when I'm reviewing any books, I generally kind of keep myself away from everything because I don't want other people's opinions to influence my own. And it's also a neat surprise to see what other people thought of the exact same thing that I read and that I covered. And with Rumor, they've been fantastic at helping me to minimalize my writing style. They give me 300 words. There's only so much you can write. Right. And one of the things that I didn't mention in there that was tough for me, it was in my original draft, was exactly what you mentioned, Steve, was the narration of it and the change of the viewpoints. And I thought, well, I'll just leave that in my review. That'll be a nice surprise for people. And one of the things that it was in my early draft that I wanted to talk to you about that you actually mentioned that I'm really curious to see what other people think is that you change your viewpoint. I mean, generally, it's as a rule of thumb for writing, it's you stick to a POV and you don't change POVs, whatever you do. But obviously, you're as an English major yourself. As you said a little bit ago here, you are a master of English, literally, and you've got the accolades to prove that you are, and you know how to break the rules. And I think it's within the first 10, 20 pages or so that you essentially go from a third person POV to narrowing down to a first person POV with I guess would be really our main character, Kevin, where he writes from his journal. And then later on in the book, as the journal entries kind of change, I don't want to spoil it too much, change it, but you kind of change the POV a little bit again, and it should have been awkward. It shouldn't have worked, but it worked really, really well to the point where I was in Kevin's head realizing, hey, wait a second, when did he change POVs? Like the transition was so smooth. Was that something you had to kind of go back and forth on and trying to get it and so you got that right?
Honestly, it was something I hadn't thought about too much until I was into the writing. And it's like, well, things are happening, and I'm not sure this character can continue to be our point of view character. And then, I wanted it to be like a multi-generational thing anyway. So it just seemed to fix itself. I realized the problem. I knew what was going to happen with our main character and that it had to change. Starting off with the third person point of view, that was not planned so much. I mean, I knew the thing was going to be mostly epistolary, but I needed some kind of intro. And I also kind of wanted to see if I could just, jar the writer or the reader a little bit. Like, okay, this is what I expect to be in a third person, kind of detached. And then all of a sudden, no, we are in first person. And I don't know, I like doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you go back to A Light Beyond, I really played with structure on that one, with the same story happening in 3 different time frames. So, I don't know.
And it worked. I mean, that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, my next.
I was just going to say that. Oh.
No, if you want to talk about A Light Beyond, because you were very kind on that one too. Go ahead.
It's hard to be harsh on any of your stuff. I mean, it's hard, and it really is. I'm not just fanboying or because I consider you a friend that I'm. Every book is the best. I mean, there's some that obviously I do have my favorites of yours, and it is hard to pick a favorite. But I know The Light Beyond really, really struck a lot of chords with me. I mean, it definitely told a very harsh and sad story, and I found that again that POV shift and the point of view shift really worked well. And I know going back to Mother, I found it gave it a real cinematic approach too. I mean, for people listening right now watching this that are probably wondering, well, what's this all about too? So if you don't mind me giving a quick nutshell version of it.
No, please do.
I love that it opens up literally. It's almost like a camera that swoops down on the scene of these, but a dozen students and their gym teacher. They're going across a field in a searchlight looking for a missing girl, and they find a cave opening instead. And in a nutshell, they basically get trapped in this cave, and of course, they have no choice but to continue on into the cavern and trying to find their way out. And unfortunately, find their way very much immersed in this cave and the horrors that they find in there, which is Mother, which is a this strange. You can only assume she's not. The origin isn't really explained, which I absolutely love because, how would these kids find out what Mother really is as well? But she's essentially this, I guess, sort of telekinetic gelatinous blob thing that's trying to consume all the life forms around her or it in order to, I guess, humanize enough to get enough functionality that Mother can escape the cave and kind of go off, I guess, on whatever happens to be Mother's agenda. And of course, it's amazing all the relationship of these kids that are there that are forced to, essentially be these slaves to Mother's agenda, where their only option is to fornicate, increase their population and feed off of these fish from this pond that must go somewhere because it continues to populate. It's always got the supply of fish, which I guess is a blessing and a curse for these poor kids that don't have anything else to do about that. And I love, and to tie that in with their change in narration, it's really cool the way that, again, it's very cinematic where it's almost like you've got this high level overview of this camera that kind of gets in and pans in and gets, right inside of Kevin's head, the main character, as he's writing the journal and all the happenings and the horrors and everything else. The one thing I like too is that you really focus on the evolution of all these kids. And then, of course, again, not to spoil it, but it really goes beyond, as they start to make babies and to have babies, and the complications, and to the relationships, and of course, how the heck do you safely birth a child? Obviously, healthcare is not there. And you've got these teens that eventually are there long enough to become adults, but their youth gets very quickly, and their innocence gets very quickly shattered. The evolution of these kids, did you find that a lot of it kind of, as a father of teens yourself and now young adults yourself, minus some of the more horrific events, at least God, I sure hope so. Did you find that you had a lot of that kind of in mind as far as the evolution of watching your children grow up to become adults, to the sort of evolution, as horrific as it was, with the children in Mother?
Oh yeah. Yeah, of course. So much of the maturation of the kids in Mother is, sexual. So fortunately, I've not actually seen that aspect of kids, but not only my kids, but it's weird to say, but I've taught generations of kids now. Former students have gone on and gotten married and had their own kids, and two of my kids have kids, so it's been something to watch. As they do grow into that, and then they have the children and see how they respond to it. I used some of that, but of course it was very limited because they are a very small society. I mean, they start off just 13, and then of course one of those drops off almost immediately, and then one of them changes a lot and isn't really part of their society, just kind of outside the society. So they didn't have Facebook to talk about their little family and all that. Plus, I mean, it starts in 1978. So that was kind of a challenge too, was, okay, it's 1978. So how would they originally be dressed? What would be important to kids in 1978? I kind of went back to my past on that one. They were older than I was in 78. But yeah, I remember the 70s a little bit. Yeah, it was interesting to think about. Okay, they are teenagers, but how would they grow in such a small, limited environment? And I think they began to care for each other quite a bit when they originally went in. They all knew each other, but they weren't necessarily friends.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed in that one as well, is the fact that, like you said, they were aware of each other. But yeah, you can hear my little guy in the background. It's not a real podcast until you get a domestic disturbance.
Well, I really thought my cat would crawl across my chest a minute ago, but she went the other way.
No. So, yeah, and that's the thing that I love about that too, is that it's interesting dynamics with that, because you've got some of the kids that, again, it really goes into the underlying theme of Mother, is that so much of it is absolutely forced, and these poor kids that, I guess at that age as well, they're still very much
that's Dad's. Come on. Ouch.
They're still very much in the adaptive stage, where they don't know what to do because they don't have those life lessons, so they have no choice but to adapt the best way they can.
Ouch.
And all of a sudden they're kind of adapting to the relationships that's forced upon them. And certainly in one scene you have it set up where they make the best of it. I mean, it's very disturbing. There's definitely a couple of the most disturbing scenes I've ever read in that. The one that you thought was my choice for one of those scenes, which is understandable, would I guess be the third most disturbing scene. It's more unsettling because at first I'm reading this and I'm not sure this is a spoiler, because this might actually intrigue everybody watching this to say, oh, now I gotta read this guy, where you talk about the orgy scene. So if people are distracted, I'm sure that we've got their attention now, but it's incredible because you've basically got a bunch of horny teens, and I could see you certainly tapping into your background with a lot of the romance stuff that you've written to really get onto that. I mean, this is a scene that, frankly, you probably could have segmented that one scene and you've got yourself a Playboy thing, except of course the age factor is in there because they're still kids. And I'm reading this thinking, kids aren't supposed to do this. Holy crap, Steve, what have you done here? And I'm starting to question my own morality. I'm reading this stuff and it's pretty graphic. You don't hold back at all. But then when you think about that, well, it's natural. There's, like it or not, or be disturbed or not, which is the point. Obviously, it's even disturbing for these kids who have to look back on all this, that's the natural course of these horny kids, that's literally their function down there is to populate. So they're like, all right, screw it, I guess. Let's make the best of this. And what was that scene like for you to write? I mean, I guess you tapped in a lot of your romance background for that, and did you kind of need a shower afterwards, or?
No, I mean, it was kind of gross to write because they are kids. I mean, to be clear, they are like between 16 and 18 years old.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, still underage for most cases. But, they're told they have to fornicate and they have to move around. They're not allowed to make pair bonds. But I believe that humans naturally will form pair bonds. And they did. I mean, they did what they had to do because, Mother was quite clear and the punishment was obvious what was going to happen if they didn't do her will. Mm-hmm. But all of them, except one, had somebody that they would default back to. And so the biggest thing about the orgy was them obviously breaking the pair bonds, where before, they would go off in the dark and nobody saw what they were doing. Yeah. But this time, there were other factors that really kind of kicked it all off as far as, their diet. But also, I watched a documentary several years ago, and it was comparing sexual attitudes of the 70s to modern day. And what they had done was they had put a bunch of young adults, I mean, they were a little bit older than my kids in the story, in a completely dark room. There was absolutely zero light. And within about an hour, they were all having sex. the ones in the 70s. They did it again with the same age group in modern day. I mean, it was like 5-10 years ago now. And there was nothing. They sat and they talked. Nobody came on to anybody. Nobody, got undressed and said, hey, as long as we're in here. So, there was that aspect, the bringing in the 70s. They did have a freer outlook on sex. Although for most of these characters, it was their first time in the cave.
Yeah.
So the romance definitely came into that, especially with Kevin. He's a rather sensitive person.
Yeah.
You had the jock who was not quite as sensitive about it. He was definitely down for, multiple partners.
Yeah.
But yeah, the orgy scene itself, I wasn't even sure it was going to happen. I mean, I knew it would happen. I just didn't know that I would put so much of it, on the page. But then I was like, well, okay, I kind of have to keep going because I have to explore their feelings. And it turned into quite a scene.
Yeah.
Probably the most
really
I've done since 7 Days in Benevolence.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that the story wouldn't have been the same without that scene because, like I said, for me, it was very unsettling, which is, of course, the point of that. And it just really exemplified what these poor kids are truly going through and what they're forced to do. And like you said, I mean, that's very interesting you mentioned about the documentary that you saw because, clearly that's just the way the kids back in the 70s would have reacted. I mean, what else are they supposed to do? They're going to explore what they have available to them and their options.
Yeah, and you got to consider too. I mean, they were down there for a long time before the orgy scene happened, and
right,
they had no form of entertainment other than somebody had a Bible and there was a couple paperback books somebody carried down there, but there was no TV, no radio, certainly no video games. So they had to do something, and
Doesn't leave too many other options.
No, it doesn't.
So, and speaking of the, how you tied in the relationship scene with it, and I know I've alluded, of course, a couple of times to the romance side of you, because, of course, not only are you very adept at writing these amazing gruesome scenes, as well as these amazing highly sexual scenes. You may not be living the proverbial or the stereotypical romantic starving artist life, but you do have a romance side to you as well. So how do you find that? Because I know you've written, of course, some straight ahead romance stories, paranormal romance stuff with Carrie Jones. You've even written some westerns, as well as some straight ahead horror stuff and more, I guess, mainstream speculative fiction stuff. Like, how does it all for you tie in? I mean, is it sort of one of the same and it's whatever the story dictates, or how do you find that has affected your overall writing canon?
I mean, it is a mixed thing. I mean, I've come to recently realize that I've never written a book with a happily married couple. They are either estranged or divorced or looking for love.
Yeah.
But I mean, romance, I think we all crave it. We all want, that life partner. And so to write realistic characters, you have to at least acknowledge it. Maybe they get the love they want, maybe they don't. But everybody, wants somebody. So, I mean, if you go back to Shara, I mean, so much of Shara was relationship based. Her prom night, the guy she'd dated for several years, everything fell apart that night. And she turned to Ulrich partially because of some daddy issues, and then later when she met Chris, of course, she had other relationships along the way, but all of them, I mean, like the book that's going to come out next called The Teacher, it's very much relationship based, which also it's not horror at all, but relationships. I guess maybe since my divorce too, I'm even more focused on relationships and the dynamics of them and what makes them work and what makes them not work.
Yeah, it is traumatizing as going through any kind of divorce like that, especially when you do have children involved. It really changes your perspective on a lot of things, and it's one thing to, I guess, to imagine it's something completely to go through it. So as hard and tough as that no doubt was, and perhaps even forever will continue to be for you as you look back on things, and that I'm sure it has definitely shaped your perspective. And if we can tie that into the writing, the writing aspect, I'm sure that will play a part. And I think I don't know if I want to say a positive, but I guess in a sense it might be, because you write so honestly that I think a lot of people pick this up, and a lot of people relate to that, because it's hard to get so far in life without having at least a few broken relationships in there, whether they're traumatizing or you're over it kind of thing, and everybody you've ever been in a relationship with is just absolutely dead to you. But either way, I think that people can certainly relate to that aspect that you mentioned, that you've gone through, and that you write about.
It was interesting. The book I'm writing now for National Auto Writing Month, I've got this thing where I'll post my word count and a quote from that day's writing online. And,
I know, I love reading them.
Well, thank you. A week or so back, a friend of mine, somebody I used to work in a machine shop with, saw my quote, and it was something about, the main character realizing that he was a sick old man. And he asked me, is this autobiographical? And, I just kind of flippantly answered that, well, it's all autobiographical if you peel back enough layers. And honestly, it is. I mean, every character I've written, good or bad, there is something about that character that I have to be able to identify with. And Shara, again, is probably the most prime example. I mean, her name is Shara Elaine Wellington. Her initials are SEW, same as mine.
Wow, I'm embarrassed I never picked up on
that. The shyness and all that she felt, I mean, that was very much me, very much an introvert. I never had an Ulrich to help get me out of it.
I know. I don't think most of us did.
No. But yeah, you got to pour yourself into the book in some way, and I think the people who read my books, they come away knowing something about me, whether they realize it or not, and I think that's how it should be.
100%. So I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. Then, speaking of, that aspect of it with autobiography and putting yourself into the books. And I think that people certainly pick up on that too. You can read a book and thinks this person just wrote by the numbers for a paycheck or what have you, but you can't lie about that kind of stuff. It's either there or it's not. And certainly with yours, it's and most successful authors, it is there. But if somebody wanted to know as much as possible about you, short of hiding out in your bushes and being invited into your house, probably after not being in the bushes, which book would you point them to, or which maybe two books would you point them to say, peel back the layers, you're going to find most of me in this book or these two books?
Wow. That is tough. I would still default back to Shara, because I did put so much of myself as I was at that time in that book.
I will also,
for
people that don't know, here it is a cover of it there.
Yeah.
Folks
yeah, that's
that.
the Scribe Press edition. Yeah. I love that cover.
Me too, yeah. It's so good.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine. Definitely that one is where I was at the time as far as being so introverted and trying to come out of that, which I guess was kind of through my writing rather than become a werewolf, although I was certainly asked enough if I was a werewolf. Amara's Prayer was another big one as far as where am I at this time. I was going through some personal stuff, and the themes of how much can you forgive and is your faith real if it's never tested was very much on my mind during the writing of that book. If you want to know where I am now, there's a book I finished over the summer. It's called The Lost Pages Bookstore, and it's a literary novel, and that is very much where I am now. I mean, it's about an author who he became a big name fantasy author, and then he did some stuff that ended his marriage, and then his mother died, which unfortunately was kind of a premonition for myself. But he retreats to Northwest Oklahoma, which is just prairie, and he goes to this small town called Sagebrush, and he buys a used bookstore there, and he just kind of hides there for almost 8 years until his creative writing teacher dies, and he goes back to his hometown to the funeral. And one person from his past and another person who was kind of existential, or the teacher's granddaughter, stows away in the back of his truck, and his dad, who had been living in a nursing home, makes him take him back with him. And so they go back to Sagebrush together, and his dad and this young girl force him out of his shell. And then we have a romance develop. Not with a girl, with a waitress across the street from the bookstore.
Okay.
But, yeah, that's, I mean, so much of, the guilt and the loneliness that I have been going through the last few years are tied up into that book.
Yeah. And do you find when you're able to get that, the inner emotions out, especially when it's, I mean, unfortunately, the one stereotypical aspect of writing that certainly is true, I think, for most people, at least, it is a solitary event. I mean, at least the part where you're putting it, where you're getting the story laid out. Do you find that when you're sort of in that solitary moment, you're getting that out in your books, do you find that that's sort of a painful endeavor for you? Is it cathartic for you? Maybe somewhere in between? Is it easier to manage those emotions once they're in a book form, or how do you find that is?
It's extremely cathartic. I mean, I don't have really any close friends to talk about my stuff with. So yeah, it all comes out in the books. I've told people for years that writing is my therapy, and it does. I mean, it helps to put it on the page. Of course, it's always a little bit different on the page than reality, but I know where it's coming from, and maybe it's weird to say, but I mean, I can really manipulate my own emotions with what I'm writing. Because of the memories attached to it and the real feelings. And then it comes out and people don't know where the autobiographic part stops and where the fiction picks up, and they make some assumptions about my personality or what I'm really going through. And it's like, no, that part's not real.
Yeah. Of course, that's the benefit of the fantasy writing part, I guess, is that you do, and the beauty of it too is that you do get an opportunity to get your heart out, but be able to change or manipulate the narrative a little bit. And that's where some of the catharsism comes into play as well.
Yeah, my cat is knocking stuff over on my desk.
Which is funny. I've got mine scratching the door right now.
To some degree, you get to control the ending. I mean, I've never yet written a book where the ending happened the way I envisioned it at the beginning. But sometimes they're closer than others.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm just going to let Mary done cat in.
Okay.
There we go. She's relentless.
Oh, aren't they always?
Yes. Yeah, cats rule the world in this household. So that's really interesting to hear you talk about that. And I know certainly with, again, going back to Mother, one aspect of the review that I did write about is that, the ending of that is, comes across very cathartic until it doesn't, where it's, I wonder how biographical that is for you too, where it's, okay, well, in a sense, we can sort of, despite how things did end, and there's certainly some heartache and etc. involved in there, and some lingering horror, of course, and what ifs. There is some sort of a sense of peace, in a sense, at least I felt. And then, of course, the cap at the end of that is that, oh, well, maybe this isn't as peaceful of ending as I thought it might have been. So do you find that that's sort of biographical as well, or that was that done on purpose, or was that, I should say, done on purpose, but was it done maybe unexpectedly as well, where you couldn't even have a peaceful ending for the story, such as it was? Because it seemed like you alluded to a peaceful ending, and then you shot it all to hell at the end.
Yeah, I mean, the epilogue was definitely, I got to the end of the epistolary part and thought, can I just leave it here? I mean, I think the reader might ask for what's next. And so I kind of thought, where would it go? And then there was always the nagging suspicion, or the nagging thing about all these kids just disappeared, and how did this town continue? I mean, they had the original missing girl that they were looking for, and then you got a teacher and 12 kids disappear. How would the town recover, and how long would the what if linger? So I felt like the epilogue kind of tied a little bit together as far as the characters in the cave and the aspect of what people in the town had been thinking and suspecting. So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, and again, I mean, it's, that's one of the things I love about your writing, is that it's very honest. It's very believable, because you look back and, at one point I'm like, what the hell, Steve? I wanted not necessarily a happy ending, but a resolved ending at least. But then the way you left it, there's so much up in the air still. But then, of course, how could it be any other way? I mean, it was very honest and it was very truthful to the story, and and I guess that's the point. And a lot of your books that are written that way too, is it really makes you think about that, where you don't just read it and there's really nothing left in your imagination. There's nothing left to absorb, because, you had that nice little neat bow at the end of it all. And it's like, oh, okay, great. He wrote for me because that's what I would have expected. But it's like, no, that's not how you did things at all. And I don't think that's how you should have done things. It works so well for the stories and gives people something to actually ponder over and contemplate, and does exactly, I think, what great writing's supposed to do.
I'll tell you how I originally envisioned the ending of Mother, like 30 some years ago.
Okay.
They were all down there. Only Mother escaped. she achieved what she achieved in the book, but then she's the one who escaped, and she came into political power, and there was a World War III,
Oh,
and
wow.
the way everybody else got out was because the area was being bombed, and it reopened the cave, and they were able to escape, and then they had to set out to destroy Mother. I thought, okay, well that gets way too big and becomes very impersonal at the end. And I like it more. They're all confined in there, kind of a Night of the Living Dead, which is one of my favorite movies.
100%.
A few people in a small setting having to deal with what's going on around them, rather than, oh my gosh, it's a global war.
Yeah.
But I think
that definitely would have turned it upside down. And pardon me, sorry.
Well, back when I first started writing, I mean, I had some wild stories. I remember getting one rejection letter where the editor told me that this story is just too far out there. It's not believable. And I rewrote that story. Actually became SKN3, which is one of my better Halloween stories. But originally, I mean, it took place in a warehouse, and there was moving crates and underground caverns and all this crazy stuff. And in the rewrite, it's a slum doctor, and it all takes place in his house. And it's such a better story. And I think
I remember that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again,
very
it's just
cool.
Just focus on one character. Focus, or one character at a time, maybe.
Yeah, and it worked really well because even though you did have the different characters, I found that it was easy. You kind of got rid of the peripheral stuff when you were zoned in on each individual character, and of course, a lot of them really tied in really nicely together.
Yeah.
I guess if you will, Steve, two quick questions then before we wrap this up. And thanks again so much for your time today, and being part of the first ever episode. So it's it's been really exciting. Been really exciting to have this conversation with you. So I guess the penultimate question that I have is regards to Nanowrimo,
whichever. Yeah.
Sure. The insane, crazy writing competition that happens every November. So what, for those people that don't know what it is, so my understanding is that essentially you sit down and you log your progress into the Nanowrimo website, and I know all the socials kind of have their own hashtags and Facebook groups and whatnot too, to keep up with that. So essentially the goal is to write a 50,000 word book or more, I suppose, in the single month, and what is it, 31 days in November, and to sit down and just to write something. Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be great, doesn't have to be anything but words on a paper. Is that about right?
Yeah.
As far as the description?
Yeah.
And how many times have you done that?
I've only done it twice. I did it last year. I did it this year. Last year was really good because I was coming out of that long funk where I didn't write anything. I mean, I know when I sit down to do it, I can go pretty fast. So it was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I've got 30 days. It's going to force me to write every day. And sure enough, I mean, the floodgates opened. I wrote Mother in 30 days. And it actually did take me about 30 days to get I think it ended up being like 52,000 words last year. But then after that, I mean, Lost Pages bookstore had been hanging around for years. And I was able to finish that. I've done some other smaller things. Did a lot of erotica. And then I prepped for the book I'm writing now for that competition. And I was shocked. I mean, when I wrote with Carrie, we would knock off like an 80,000 word book in a month by switching back and forth. I mean, she'd write a chapter, I'd write a chapter, and we just send it back and forth. We didn't plan out a lot ahead of time. And I thought that was really fast, but I've never written 50,000 words in 17 days. So, I mean, that felt real good.
That's just insane. And how did you do that? I mean, was it a specific time you sat down, or was it just kind of every spare moment you had, you're sitting down and adding to it?
Well, I'm a teacher, and we're reading Dracula, and I'm doing grade level, so I can't just assign, read this chapter of Dracula and be ready to discuss it tomorrow. It doesn't work that way with grade level students. It's okay, this is what we read yesterday, and then you start the audio book, and then after the chapter, you review it. So as they are listening to Dracula, which I get to listen to 6 times a day, I'm banging out my own book, and then I go in the evening, and after I take my very insistent dog to the park and have some dinner, I'd sit down and write some more. And the book I'm doing now is one that I've not held in my mind for years and years. It's a much more recent idea. So I was really surprised to see it come out so fast. Usually they have to cook.
And it's called, I guess, Yes or No?
Yeah, I'm calling it Yes or No. And it's another one. It kind of plays with structure and time a little bit. There's a guy in a nursing home, assisted living center. He has COPD, which unfortunately I know too much about now, and because of my mom. Yeah. And one day he's expecting a visitor. She's letting him know that she's coming, and this woman in her 30s comes in and sits down and spreads out all these printouts of pictures, some of which are from his high school yearbook. And she starts asking, do you know this woman? And he says, well, yeah, that was my girlfriend in high school. And she says, well, I'm your daughter. And from there, it was going to take weeks, the timeline of the book, as, they went back and forth on whether or not she was actually his daughter. But they're doing the DNA swab test, and he agrees to do it on the condition that she stays in town. She's from out of state. She has to stay and take him out of the nursing home to do some things, because he's been in there for years. And before that, he was in and out of prison, jails, nursing home, or rehab centers. And he knows he doesn't have a lot of time left, and he wants to get out. He wants to see a sunset. He wants to go sit at the mall and just watch people. And so it becomes a story about how these two people bond as they wait to see what their actual relationship is. And it all takes place over the course of about 6 days.
Wow, that's I'm very interested in reading that one, especially somebody I actually work in a long-term care center myself right now, and I started out actually working in our every section of the residences. They're referred to as neighborhoods. So I worked in the neighborhood that is with it's the only secured one in the building, actually, with folks that have advanced dementia. So it's seeing a lot of the residents there, and their how they sort of go downhill and degenerative, or some of the ones that of course bounce back and forth sometimes between being pretty lucid and just not lucid at all. So that's it'd be really interesting how you tackle that. And do you find that when you bang into a story like that, especially, and this is I'm really happy that this is one that hasn't been sitting in your brain a lot, because I imagine that's probably maybe most of the case for most folks that sit down for the Nanowrimo. You of course have the benefit of having the English background, the degrees and such. So editing, I would imagine you probably write a lot cleaner than most folks would. Do you find when you write that fast, is there a lot to edit afterwards, or do you find like it's a pretty long journey to get into the final draft when you're writing that fast?
Surprisingly not. After I wrote Mother last year, I let it set for several months, until I finished Lost Pages, which was 6 or 7 months before I went back to it, and it was surprisingly clean. There are certain mistakes that I know I make, like I'll drop E's sometimes, or write instead of F, things like that, and then those always have to be cleaned up. But as far as story wise, or all this scene's out of place, no. My first drafts are fairly clean.
Very nice. And I guess I kind of lied a little bit too. I snuck in an extra question there for you. So I guess one last question before we do wrap things up here, Steve, is, and you alluded to this a little bit before, but what is coming out next as far as published stuff that folks can look forward to reading, and what's the best way to find you?
Well, let me do the next book. It's called The Teacher, It is a literary novel, and it's another one where I really play with structure, and that is, oh, it's giving me fits. It is about a teacher who is estranged from his wife and daughter. He's having an affair with another teacher. That teacher is married to a man who becomes a state senator soon after the book starts. So of course, they got to be very careful about their relationship. And he's a kind of teacher very much like I was the first 12 years. He has very strong relationships with his students. He's a Stuco sponsor and all that, like I was, and kids have his phone number. And what happens to him is what people kept telling me what happened to me. Unfortunately, it never did happen to me. But eventually, one student develops a relationship that is not, teacher student or student mentor, or even, like a father figure. She develops a romantic relation or interest in him that he doesn't foster, but through his own trusting and ignorance, he allows himself to be set up where perception is taken as reality, and it changes his life a lot more. And like I said, I play with structure. A lot of it is narrative, but then there's a lot of epistolary stuff. There are social media posts, blog posts, diary entries. At one point, there's even a fake student essay. And I feel like they all advance the plot, whereas in narration, it would take a lot more to develop, what's happening. But
Right.
like the tweets and stuff, in just a few sentences, you can impart a lot of emotional impact. And reading through it again. So I originally wrote this one in like 2014, 2015, and going back and reading it now, there were several things in there that upset me as far as, I remember why I wrote that. I remember what I was going through when I did that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm editing the proofs to make sure that all the stuff is right. Because when you get into like social media posts, if you're going to do it accurate, you'll have somebody comment, and then
Right.
well, somebody will post, and then a comment will be over here, and then the next comment here and here, like stair steps down. But when you actually see that on the printed page, it looks weird. And so I've got to make a final decision on what should this look like, because some of them came out okay and some of them did not. But it will be out before Christmas.
Awesome. I'll look forward to that. I'll consider that my Christmas present this year then. To myself. I mean, I'm going to go and order that book.
Like I say, it is literary. There's absolutely no supernatural in it, which I guess I really started kind of doing that kind of stuff with Inheritance and then A Light Beyond. And I guess I've just been like moving that way. But like with Mother, it was really nice to go back to the roots and just write a full-on horror story.
Yeah, and then of course there's your one little graveyard in the prairie as well, which is written as if it could be horror, but then you find, I mean, it is horrific, but at the same time, it's not exactly the horror book or the supernatural book you thought it was. It's just a fantastic story again about the degenerative mind, and yeah, it was great. And I love that you're experimenting with different formats and everything else too. So it's keeps things spiced up.
As far as where to find me, my website is about to migrate away from GoDaddy because they have changed up a lot of stuff and they want a lot more money. One of my former students runs his own IT company now, and I'm going to migrate everything to him. So within the next week or so, that should happen. But still, StephenEWedel.com and WerewolfSaga.com will still get you to my webpage. And then you can find all my books on Amazon. Everything is available in paperback and ebook, and almost everything is available in audio. And now KDP is offering a hardcover option, so I may look into that later on.
Very cool. Yeah, I'd love to have some of your books in a hardcover as well. I mean, especially, some of people saw the couple of the covers that I showed up. To have those things in a hardcover edition would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, those covers, the original covers for the Werewolf Saga, the artist whose name escapes me at the moment, he is so good. I'd love to have those in hardcover, but I'd have to pay
absolutely
children.
yeah, for sure. Hunt them down and give them an offer you can't refuse. Hopefully.
Excuse me.
No problem. Well, thank you very much again, Steve. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm very honored and blessed that you chose to be the first official guest on this podcast. So,
well, thank you
again. Can't thank you enough, and I hope that everybody watching this and listening to this really enjoyed it as well. I think they will, and more importantly, I hope they go out and grab as many of your books as possible. So there's a lot out there. So it's get reading.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thank you again, Steve. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
All right.